Picture this. A 9-year-old boy abandoned on the frozen steppes of Mongolia. His father was poisoned and his family was cast out. 30 years later, that same boy leads an army of 100,000 horsemen. He topples empires that had stood for centuries. Empire like China, Persia and Eastern Europe. At the height of his power, his empire stretches from Korea to Hungary. Larger than Rome at its peak. Larger than Alexander's conquests and the largest land empire in human history. His name was Genghis Khan. And everything you learned about him was wrong. They taught you he was a monster, a destroyer of civilizations and a bloodthirsty barbarian. But they never told you he abolished torture, that he promoted women to power, that he built the first international postal system, and made the Silk Road safer than it had ever been. This is the story they don't want you to know, the truth about the man who changed the world. Before Genghis Khan, the Mongolian steppe knew no peace. Endless grasslands were stained with blood. Dozens of tribes, the Tartars, the Merkits, the Naimans, were locked in a constant cycle of revenge. There were no kings, no borders, and no mercy. Then, around 1162 CE, a boy was born near the banks of the Onon River. His name was Temujin, named after a captured warrior. A name that meant iron. And destiny would prove it true. When Temujin was 9, his father, Yasugei, arranged his marriage and set out for home. But along the way, he stopped to share a drink with old enemies, the Tatars. They greeted him with smiles, and poisoned his cup, which led to the death of his father. When Yasugei died, his clan abandoned his family. They took their herds, their weapons, everything. Temujin's mother, Holun, taught her children to survive on roots and frozen fish. The Mongolian winter shows no mercy, but neither did she. Driven by hunger and rage, Temujin killed his half-brother Bektar, who had tried to steal food from their mother. That day, the boy became a protector. He had taken a life, and would never fear losing his own again. The Taichiud captured him, chaining his neck in a wooden collar and parading him through their camps. He was mocked, beaten, starved. But Temujin never begged. He watched. He waited. One night, while his captors slept, Temujin escaped. He plunged into the river, breathing through a reed as torches passed overhead. When the light faded, he emerged from the freezing water, shivering, exhausted, but free. Years later, he returned a changed man. He began gathering others, outcasts, orphans, the betrayed. He saw what others could not. True power comes from loyalty, not bloodline. And though he had no tribe, no army, no crown, he carried a vision that would one day set the world on fire. The boy who survived the frozen steppe was no longer a child. Hardened by hunger, betrayal, and death, he had learned the steppe's harshest lesson: strength alone isn't enough, loyalty is everything. Temujin began slowly, gathering men abandoned by life itself, outcasts, slaves, warriors without clans. He offered them a revolutionary idea: merit, not birth, would decide their fate. A shepherd could become a general. A former enemy could join if he swore loyalty. If a soldier died, his family was cared for. If wounded, he shared in the spoils. No one had seen leadership like this before. Men didn't just fight for Temujin, they believed in him. They followed him willingly, and that belief was more powerful than any sword. Temujin's greatest rival was his childhood friend, Jamukha. They had once sworn brotherhood, shared dreams, but ambition drove them apart. Jamukha held on to the old ways, loyalty through blood, revenge as justice. But Temujin stood for something new: unity through law, and power earned by merit, not birth. In 1201 CE, Temujin and Jamukha met on the battlefield. Jamukha had the larger army, but Temujin's discipline and strategy turned the tide. Years later, Jamukha was betrayed and brought before Temujin. Temujin offered him mercy, a place at his side. But Jamukha refused, choosing death with honor. Temujin had him executed without spilling blood, a final gesture of respect in a brutal world. In 1206 CE, the Kurultai gathered on the banks of the Onon River. Leaders from across the steppe proclaimed Temujin Genghis Khan as the universal ruler. For the first time, the Mongol tribes were united. Not just by fear, but by law. Genghis Khan established the Yasa, a strict code of laws that bound everyone, even the Khan himself. Theft was punishable by death, adultery was forbidden, and religious freedom was protected. Under this new order, he reorganized his army into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, ensuring that loyalty belonged not to tribes, but to the empire itself. Promotion was no longer a matter of birth or bloodline. It was earned through skill, discipline, and merit. Genghis Khan's warriors could ride 100 miles a day, carrying dried meat under their saddles. They drank fermented mare's milk, even horseblood when desperate. When they fought, they were unstoppable. But Genghis Khan's genius wasn't just battlefield skill. He protected families, rewarded loyalty, and integrated conquered peoples. Men wanted to fight for him. Temujin had transformed from the boy abandoned in the snow into a leader commanding respect, loyalty, and fear. The stage was set for the largest empire the world had ever seen. Between 1206 CE and 1227 CE, Genghis Khan built an empire that spanned 12 million square miles, from Korea to Hungary. He didn't just conquer. He revolutionized warfare. He turned chaos into order, tribes into armies, armies into a machine that could devour kingdoms. His armies mastered the art of psychological warfare. They spread rumors of their brutality so cities would surrender without a fight. Scouts rode ahead to map every road, every gate, and every weakness. When resistance came, the Mongols were merciless. But when cities surrendered, they were spared. For Genghis, fear was not cruelty, it was efficiency. In 1215 CE, Genghis Khan laid siege to Zhengdu, modern-day Beijing. His warriors had never faced massive stone fortresses before. So Genghis Khan did what no nomad had done: he learned their ways. He recruited Chinese engineers to teach siege warfare. Within months, his men mastered what had taken others centuries. Zhengdu fell. The Jin dynasty never recovered. He built the Yam system, a vast network of relay stations that stretched across continents. Couriers could ride thousands of miles, changing horses at each post to keep their pace. Messages that once took months to deliver now arrived in a matter of days. It was the ancient world's version of the internet, that was fast, efficient, and nearly unstoppable. Under Mongol rule, the Silk Road became safer than it had ever been. Merchants traveled from Venice to Beijing without fear of bandits. Trade flourished. Ideas flowed. Genghis Khan didn't just conquer lands, he connected civilizations. He enforced religious freedom across his empire. Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, shamans, all worshipped freely. There is one sun in the sky, he said, but many paths to reach it. While Europe burned in crusades, Genghis Khan's lands were united by tolerance, not fear. He even exempted priests and monks from taxes. Genghis Khan also transformed the status of women in his empire. Mongol women could own property, divorce, and manage their own households. When the men rode to war, it was the women who handled trade, finances, and the affairs of daily life. His wife, Borte, was his most trusted advisor, and his daughters ruled over conquered territories with full authority. He even outlawed the kidnapping of women, a brutal custom that had long plagued the steppe. To Genghis Khan, true strength wasn't limited to men, it was found in anyone with the courage and wisdom to lead. This was not the empire of a barbarian, it was an empire built on law and order. Persian historians called his reign the Great Peace. Chinese scholars wrote that merchants traveled without fear. Even European chroniclers, centuries later, described his rule as remarkably organized and just. Genghis Khan ruled through fear, yes, but he sustained peace through discipline and the unyielding strength of his laws. By the height of his reign, Genghis Khan ruled more land than Rome, Alexander, or Napoleon ever dreamed of. From Korea to Hungary. From Siberia to the Persian Gulf. And through it all, his empire brought peace, order, and connection. A world that, for the first time, felt truly united. By 1226 CE, Genghis Khan was in his late 60s, but age had not slowed him. He rode at the head of his armies through deserts, rivers, and frozen mountains. He conquered the Tangut kingdom, punishing them for betrayal. Even as his empire stretched across continents, he still led from the front. Facing the same storms, the same hunger, the same exhaustion as his men. To his warriors, he was more than a ruler. He was a force of nature. In 1227 CE, during his campaign against the Western Xia, something happened. No one knows exactly what happened. Some say Genghis Khan fell from his horse, others say that he was struck by an arrow. The Mongols won the war, but their great Khan never recovered. Before his death, he gave one final command: that the complete destruction of the Tangut kingdom. His soldiers obeyed, by wiping it out city by city, until nothing remained. Genghis Khan died in August 1227 CE, surrounded by his most loyal generals. No monument was built. No tomb marked his resting place. His death was kept secret until his army completed their conquest. For even in death, his presence commanded fear. The story of Genghis Khan's burial remains one of history's greatest mysteries. According to legend, his funeral escort killed anyone they encountered along the road to keep the tomb's location secret. When the grave was completed, the builders themselves were executed, and horses were ridden over the site until no trace remained. For 800 years, no one has ever found it. Even in death, Genghis Khan's shadow stretched across the world. His sons and grandsons built on his foundation, creating the largest contiguous empire in human history. From Russia to China, from Persia to India, trade, technology, and ideas flowed through the veins of a connected world. His laws shaped nations, his postal system inspired modern governance, and his genetic legacy lives on in millions of people across Asia today. They called him a monster, a barbarian, a destroyer of worlds. But he also abolished torture, promoted women to positions of power, guaranteed religious freedom, and built the first international postal system. Genghis Khan, who was a conqueror, visionary, enigma. A man who united the world, only to disappear into it.